Operating systems. Every server has to have one, but why in the love of Linux did they choose Ubuntu server? I will tell you right after this awkward pause. I'll be talking about why I use Ubuntu on my server host and most VMs, especially those that are part of my server infrastructure. So, first, quick intro to my server infrastructure, with later videos explaining it further. I have one single old desktop active as a server and a Ubuntu VM on my desktop also acting as a server. Additionally, I can add two more laptops into the mix if I have a temporary need for higher performance. So now that you know my infrastructure, let's talk about why I use Ubuntu, not something what some people call better server distributions like Debian or or server OSs in real world like CentOS, or more likely one of its equivalents today, Alma Linux or Rocky Linux. First, its familiarity. I'm very familiar with Debian-based systems like Ubuntu and Debian, so it makes sense to use one of those two. Reason number two is support for Docker, as Docker has rocket support on Rail-based operating systems. While yes, they have quite excellent replacement, Podman, I'm not planning to switch from Docker to Podman even though they are in many ways compatible. Reason number three is SC Linux being just plain pain, and due to my general experimental nature it would get in my way. But if you do not plan to experiment, it is a good tool to use. At this point I can just hear you guys saying, but why aren't you using Debian? You haven't listed any reasons for against Debian. And comments like that. Okay, let's get into that now. Fourth reason is updates, whether it be security updates or major updates to programs. While I do like to have stability on my servers, I do also like to have great security update story. Canonical, company who creates Ubuntu, is committed to fix high and critical severity vulnerabilities as fast as possible, as a team doing just that. While on the other hand, they be analyzing its amazing community to support such vulnerabilities, so some may fall through the cracks or don't get updated as quickly as in Ubuntu. Ubuntu also has great update story when it comes to normal updates to the system for things like kernel, when it with its HV stack, so that's hardware enablement stack for LTS releases, and as a side note, Canonical also provides optimized kernels for virtual machines and cloud environments. Now back to updates. If you are willing to venture out of the LTS release world, like I am, with interim releases coming out every 6 months, you get latest-ish software, which is great for my experimentation. But if you ask me, this doesn't really end your considerations for server OS these days, at least in my opinion, as an important part of today's servers actually are containers, and with them comes the question of what base image to use. Generally, base images are distribution root file systems, or rootfs for short, for short, for short. And for that, I also use Ubuntu. And as to reason why, first and last reason listed above are probably the main reasons why. Because under unfamiliarity, it's mostly familiarity with package manager apt, and under update is the security update story that is extremely compelling as containers needs to be secure as well. Now, before the end, let's look into the past and talk about what I used in past, and as my choice has changed depending on what I wanted and needed, and I bet my choice of server OS will change in the future. Besides Ubuntu, which is what I currently use, and I actually started with, I also used a few other server and also server operating systems in the past. On server, after I used Ubuntu for a while, I decided to switch it up a bit, and I switched to Arch. Yes, you heard me right, Arch Linux. At the time, my server structure wasn't really a thing yet. It was just me experimenting in a VM on my laptop, having just a few pieces of software that I was somewhat reliant on, but if they were gone, I wouldn't even have noticed. After Arch period, in which I also got my first what they refer to as pretend server, aka a desktop that pulls server duties, I decided to rely more on VMs. At the time, wasn't big into containers and mainly ran things in VMs. So I looked into virtualization distros that are basically virtualization server operating systems in Linux space, and ended up with an excellent choice called Proxmox, which is based on Debian. I ran it for quite a long time, even after I stopped really using VMs and started mostly doing Docker containers, as I love Proxmox's web UI, and I didn't really want to reinstall serverOS. During the period of me using Proxmox, I had used VMs of all sorts of server distros, like Fedora, like Ubuntu, like even I had an Arch, this Arch installed all the time as a server. I at the time was heavily into packaging and automating it, which is also what eventually led me down the path of containers. So after experimentations led me to have to reinstall my server OS, which was my fault totally. I started to think that I probably don't need a VM server OS just to manage containers, and at that point, I went and installed Ubuntu and I haven't looked back. Now that we are at the end of the video, only thing that remains is to say thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Goodbye.